You might be thinking that Japan is one of the richest countries in the world. I mean, they're huge in technological innovations and have a booming industry. So the people living in Japan should also have a pretty good life, right? Well, the reality looks different.
1 in 6 Japanese children are living in poverty.
Now, the number of children in Japan is at its lowest since 1950.
A surge in work-related debts is forcing Japan to take a hard look at its office culture.
Once you dig beneath the surface, you find out that there's something very wrong with the Japanese success story. And it seems like no one really wants to talk about this. Japan is bankrupt. So I wanted to know what's really happening. And this is why I traveled to Japan, to find out a little bit more about this. One person I meet during my journey is Takashii. He's a YouTuber from Japan with 1.7 million subscribers, and he focuses on showcasing this Japanese culture in a way the media often misses.
My friends are struggling just to live.
In his videos, he talks to Japanese people, and it becomes pretty clear that something is happening to the country, which is very concerning.
You're gonna leave Japan soon, right?
Yes.
There's no way to save this country anymore, I think.
To understand why Japan is in such a bad situation, I need to talk to someone who knows way more about this than I do.
Just because you can't see the disease, it doesn't mean it's not there. It is there, and it's eating us alive.
James has over 25 years of institutional investing and risk management experience and is a co-founder of the Bitcoin Opportunity Fund. Since all of this has so much to do with money, Preston Pish joins us as well. He is running one of the biggest investor podcasts in the world.
James and I, and yourself, Max, we're looking at it through a very financial lens. People who have no financial lens are looking at what's happening, and this is the narrative they're saying. It just feels like cultural erosion. Why is everybody so against each other these days? When you look at it through a financial lens, it's very obvious why.
So to understand this, we will look into how the country became so poor and what the implications are for the world. To fully understand what is happening, we need to understand money. To be precise, we need to talk a little bit more about debt. So what is debt? If you borrow money from someone else and promise to give it back later, this is called getting into debt. A lender gives the borrower some money.
So say if you wanted to do something like open a restaurant, but you only have $10,000 and you've got to lease a space, you've got to buy some equipment, you've got to hire people, all of that, yeah, but you don't have the money. So what you can do is you can put your $10,000 up and borrow against it and start that business today.
There might be some rules, some interest which we have to pay back, but basically you're okay to go after opening the restaurant. And similar to this, countries also borrow money. And after World War II, Japan needed to rebuild a lot of things.
So coming out of that World War II, the government aggressively went and was promoting and putting efforts forth in steel, automobiles, electronics, semiconductors.
But to do all of this, they needed money. So the Japanese government borrowed money. The country exploded, and they quickly became the world's #1 exporter in all of the areas the government was targeting.
Japan experienced extraordinary growth, dubbed the economic miracle. For over 40 years, it was the world's second largest economy after the United States.
The world was looking at this and saying, like, we've got to invest in Japan because they've become this behemoth, especially in tech.
Japan was growing in full force. The government made sure that any company which needed money was able to borrow money.
There's just so much investment that went in.
And therefore, a lot of things which we see around Japan are actually financed by that debt. So all the real estate, all the businesses, and all of the industry, it's financed by debt.
And that led to this massive asset bubble, which burst in the early 90s.
The country had entered a protracted recession.
The stock market plummeted and corporate investment slowed considerably.
So the government needed to react. And to counter the effects of this period of economic stagnation, they, yes, you guessed right, borrowed even more money. Slowly but surely, Japan borrowed so much money that today it has a debt to GDP ratio of 260%. If Japan would use all its annual income to pay off this debt, which means every yen the whole economy is making, with this amount of debt, it would still take them over 2.5 years to clear it. Crazy, right? No country in the world has a higher debt to GDP ratio than Japan. and the people start to feel it.
I have Thai friends. They used to go to Japan to make money now, but now they don't come to Japan anymore, because they cannot make money. They go to Australia, they go to somewhere else.
The appeal of working in a Japanese company has been fading here and in other Southeast Asian countries.
30 years ago, 40 years ago, 20 years ago, Southeast Asian people, they used to come to Japan a lot, but now it's not worth it, so they just go to somewhere else.
And this is a problem for the economy and the whole country, because somehow they need to repay all of the money they borrowed. So what options do they have? Well, if a government has high debt, it can do 3 different things. 1, go through austerity. 2, increase the taxes. Or 3, use inflation. Austerity measures involve cuts in public spending, such as healthcare, education, or infrastructure, and therefore isn't really a people's pleaser. It hurts the economy, the population, and especially the government's image.
They're going to keep spending money because they don't want to upset any constituents for cutting off funding.
And that's why it's pretty much the last option a government would choose. Option 2, raising taxes, might be an alternative. But there's also a problem to it. When people feel the influence directly, it becomes a tough pill to swallow. There's a limit to how far this method can go. If a government raises taxes too much, it risks pushing away the backbone of its economy, the capitalists and the businesses.
Every year, the number of Japanese people live in Japan is increasing. Many people going to Dubai, Singapore, especially rich people going abroad. If you make $1 million, more than 60% you cannot get it, So the more people leave Japan, the less people have money here, right?
Which you don't want as the government. But luckily, you have a third option. And not only Japan, but almost every other country in this world uses this method.
And let's say you had a very small debt burden and you didn't want the populace to have to pay for that right now through a higher tax rate for the next 5 years, because that's how it would be noticeable to the citizens. How it's typically paid for is the debasement of the currency,
also known as inflation.
It would be paid for through the debasement of the currency, and the buying power of those citizens would go down.
And that's also what's happening in Japan.
There's no reason for inflation. Absolutely no reason for it except to debase the money. And the reason they debase the money is because of debt loads at the sovereign level. It's fake productivity, because the real productivity is not outpacing the issuance of debt.
Remember, the debt is more than 2 times larger than the productivity of the whole country. Because the difference is so big, their economy alone won't be able to pay back the money. So they need to print money to be able to pay back their own debt. The official inflation numbers in Japan aren't that high yet, but it's surprising to me how much impact it has on Japanese life.
Everything is so expensive. I'm seeing higher prices on so many things I have to buy.
People are working multiple jobs, but still can't afford a reasonable life.
Yeah, it's getting more expensive because the salary is not increasing.
Unlike in other countries, Japanese wages have been stagnant for decades.
It's the same, but cost of living, it's getting more expensive. So even if you make same money, it costs a lot to live. We become poor.
Almost every person, every company, and every government around the world is in debt.
Let's back up and talk about debt. Debt is not bad in and of itself. All you're doing is pulling future productivity into the now.
Taking on debt allows us to use future earnings already today. As our business and revenues grow, we will be able to pay back this borrowed money.
It can be okay if it's a responsible, solid financial decision for yourself or for your company. But the problem is when you borrow too much and you know that you can't pay it back, then you're going to go bankrupt. And whether it's the bank or people you borrowed from, friends and family, somebody's going to get hurt.
The way you have to solve that is through austerity and working way harder to pay down the money. That's how it has to be resolved if you're going to resolve it.
I need to work harder or more innovative to be able to pay back the money which I borrowed.
At a government level, there's this false academic opinion that doesn't apply at a country level, and that you can just print money and paper over more than you actually produced at that moment in time.
According to this theory, the government can simply keep borrowing money to pay down its own debt. This sounds nice in theory, but in the practical world, the reality looks very different.
We have higher than expected Japanese inflation.
Inflation has hit Japan's currency hard.
So when people are saying that governments don't have to play by those rules, it is false. It is not true. They do have to play by those rules. The reason why this is so lost on everybody is because everybody has been playing this game where they all became over indebted.
Not just Japan. Greece, Singapore, Italy, America, France, and many more.
And they're all getting debased simultaneously by their governments. And what you're having is this very, very slow and subtle decay of morals in society. You're seeing a slow and total breakdown of culture within society, because if we took 100 people, 95 of those 100 people are very dissatisfied with their current situation because they know 20 years ago they could buy a whole lot more for the work that they performed.
My friends, they're struggling just to live. So they don't have time to think about the world. They don't have to think about environment. They don't have to think about their future,
And this has an influence on the culture. In Japan, people put a lot of importance on family values.
Because the definition of happiness was family.
And this actually changed drastically because nowadays the birth rate here in Japan is one of the lowest worldwide.
How can you afford having children when you cannot afford your living life?
Japanese people tend to work rather than being with family.
The money is broken. Everybody feels it. You feel it every day you go to the grocery store. You feel it every day that you go to work. You don't have to be educated on that, except you just realize the money is broken, the system is broken.
The financial situation of the country is very, very poor.
Any country that has a debt to GDP in the last 100 years, over 130, has defaulted. Like out of 50 countries, 49 of the 50 have defaulted.
So we've seen it in Argentina, in Venezuela, in Zimbabwe.
And the only one that wasn't was Japan.
They've been doing this for so long. Their debt to GDP is at 260+%. There's no path other than eventually hyperinflation. It's built on lies and false hope that it can go on forever, and it cannot, period.
So, looking into the future, what are the possible outcomes?
There are two paths we can go down. One path is to control the money completely. Absolute, total control over not just the money, but your spending of the money. And that's called the central bank digital currency, the CBDC. And we're seeing Europe trying to go down that path right now.
We will keep working by preparing the foundation for a possible digital euro to complement cash.
They can control all the money, and they're going to try to do this on a global scale. So we don't have any way to push back on the manipulation of the money. We don't have a way to opt out of that system because everything is digital.
And when I first heard about this path, I was shocked. That's why I investigated it in another video. If you're more interested in how this dystopian currency would look like, feel free to check out the video.
And then the other path is a digital currency that is not central bank distributed. Decentralization as the base of its creation, meaning that it's completely decentralized. The opposite of a central bank digital currency, which is fully centralized. And that's the other option.
That truly is the two paths that we're talking about. How does this thing that we've been talking about resolve itself? Well, the way it resolves itself is through a debt jubilee.
A debt jubilee is a little bit like hitting the reset button. Debts are simply forgiven or cancelled. Nice.
Who's the person that, if we go through a debt jubilee, experiences the most amount of pain, relatively speaking? It's the person who owns all those promises. It's the elites of society today. And what the elites of society today want to retain is their status. They want things to continue to be ordered in the way that they are, which is them sitting at the very top and everybody else subsidizing that lifestyle. The problem with this is this debt jubilee is like pulling out all the pillars that hold this order in place. If it's up to them, the CBDC route that James was talking about, where It's total dystopia for 99% of the population, with the 1% sitting at the top and then continuing to enjoy this ordered structure where they are the beneficiary. Means everybody becomes a total slave to whatever it is that they want or need. If we go through the debt jubilee and it's a reset with a common currency that cannot be, controlled by any one group, you get a debt jubilee where all that debt blows up and all the equity is going to get restructured and into the hands of the people that are holding this new currency. You get a free and open society where everybody is competing and everybody has a fair chance. And it's a completely different society that is rooted in trust, in ethics, respect for one another. Because if you don't play by those rules, you get crushed. I know which one I want, and each one of us have a choice to shape this. I'm very optimistic for the future. I think this is aggressively going to go in our favor, very much so. I think they are playing a very losing hand. And I know this sounds silly, but the best thing and the only thing that I feel like I can do is education, to help people actually understand the problem and, more importantly, understand the solution. And if you do understand the solution and you want to opt into the second path, not the dystopian CBDC where everybody's a slave path, the best thing you can do is buy Bitcoin, suck their monetary energy away from them so that they can't control the strings of society.
Just because you can't see the cancer, just because you can't see the disease, it doesn't mean it's not there. It is there. And it's eating us alive, and we've got to find a way out of it. And we have found a way, and that's what we're trying to teach people.
Looking at Japan from a financial perspective helped me to understand why it seems our world is currently falling apart. Everything is tied to money and debt. Despite Japan appearing as one of the richest countries from the outside, it's actually facing a colossal debt burden. Initially, taking on more debt to sustain the economy might sound good. However, what are the long-term consequences? And most importantly, how does this influence the Japanese population? History has countless examples of countries following this exact path. So if you are a Japanese citizen, I hope this video gave you a little bit of an overview what's happening in your country. But it's not just Japan. This is happening in nearly every country in our modern world. So to understand more about those two paths, you can watch my CBDC video, or for insights into neutral and decentralized money, you can head over to the Investors Podcast or the Looking Glass Education for an online course. Both resources are entirely free.
Hey, thanks for having us here in your wonderful country.
Welcome to Japan.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, man.
I gotta say, after traveling throughout the whole country, this was probably one of the best experiences I ever had in a foreign country. The people are super respectful, super helpful, and they just want you to have a good time. And therefore, I gotta say, arigatou gozaimasu to all the Japanese people which I met. If you want me to continue making those videos, I'm an independent filmmaker and therefore live off of donations. So you can send me some Bitcoin here, or you can find some PayPal links down below. And I'm gonna see you in the next video. Bye bye.